A man by the name of Roger Sims had just been, I forgot what the word is now, when you kind of get out of the army. What's the word? Discharged, that's the word. He just got discharged from the army. He was going back home to be with his family, and he was hitchhiking to get home. As he was on the road, he saw this big car coming up, a big black limousine, and he knew it was brand new. It was not only shiny and all the rest and looking new, but on top of that, it still had the temporary license plates. So he knew that this was a new car, and he figured there's no way this guy's stopping for me. But the car went by him, and all of a sudden it pulled in and pulled up. So he ran up to the car, and the guy wound the windows down and said, "If you're going to Chicago, you're in luck." And he said, "Well, I'm not going quite to Chicago, but the place I'm going to is on the road." And so he said, "Well, hop in, throw your stuff in the back." And he opened the back door and was about to throw his knapsack in, and he kind of thought he'd just place it on the leather seats. You know, it was brand new. And so he placed it on the seats, shut the door, and got in the front. And of course, they started a conversation. And Roger Sims introduced himself, and the man driving the car introduced himself. His name was Hanover, Mr. Hanover. And so they were talking all the way, and as they were sharing things about family, about life, about their kids, about their homes, and all these kind of things. They got talking about being in the army, and Hanover had also been in the army as well. And they talked about all these kind of things. But Roger Sims is a Christian. And all the time he was talking to this guy, he felt, I've got to tell him about the Lord. I've got to tell him about Jesus Christ. But you know what it's like. Some of you have been there, you know, where you've been wanting to tell someone, and your heart's going like this, you know, and you're trying, and you're starting to sweat, and you're like, oh, you know, I don't know if I can do this. You know, it's tough, isn't it? I mean, we've been there. If you've tried to tell someone about Jesus, and you're kind of, oh, I don't know if I can do this. And he was thinking all these things, and he was getting closer and closer to where he was going to kind of get out the car, and he thought, it's got to be now or never. So all of a sudden, he turned to this guy, and he says, can I ask you a personal question? And he says, sure. He says, do you know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? You know, he says, do you know? And he says, well, he says, not really. And he got talking. And Roger Sims, for the next 5-10 minutes, shared his life. Talked about how Jesus Christ had come into his life to be his personal Savior. Talked about the cross, which I just prayed about, how the cross of Jesus Christ saved him from his sins. Talked about all these things for about 10 minutes. And then he plucked up that next question, which is very hard. Sometimes you just want to talk and talk and talk and talk, you know, and because you don't want to get to the last bit where you say, do you want to ask Jesus? Maybe I can say that a different way. Do you want to ask Jesus into your life? And there was silence. And then all of a sudden the car kind of pulled over to the side and screeched to a halt. He thought he was going to be kicked out. And Mr. Hanover slumped over his steering wheel and was crying. And right there at the side of the road, they prayed. And he asked Jesus Christ into his life. They got on the road again, and a few minutes later, Roger Sims was let out the car and went on to his family and so on. 5 years later or so, around 5 years later, Roger Sims was going into Chicago to on a bit of business or something like that. And he decided he still had Mr. Hanover's card. He had given him his card, and he had told him to drop in on him any time. And anyway, he was going into Chicago, so he took his card with him, and he decided to go and visit him. And it would say it's 5-6 years after meeting him the first time. He found the address, and it was a big, tall skyscraper building, and he was up on one of the high floors, and he got in there and got in the elevator, went to the floor that he was on, went to the reception desk of Hanover Industries, went to the reception desk and asked to see Mr. Hanover. Well, the receptionist looked at him a little strange and went away, came back, and a lady came out, a well-dressed lady, and she came and said, "You're asking for Mr. Hanover." And I said, "Do you know him?" Well, and told a little bit of the story, how he'd been discharged from the army, being picked up on the road, and just thought he'd drop in and say hello to him, and, could he see him? And he said, well, he died 5 years ago. Come in and talk. So they came in touch, and she introduced herself as Mrs. Hanover. And they got talking about what had taken place all those years ago and how he had picked him up and how, and again, he's getting that feeling inside of him. Should he tell her what happened on the side of the road, or would she feel kind of, he didn't know how she would take this, but he felt this urgency inside that he's got to tell her, and so he told her what had taken place on the side of the road. He said, I've got to tell you, Mrs. Hanover, your husband just on that day, because it turned out it was the very day that he died, we stopped at the side of the road and he asked Christ into his life to be his Savior. And she just burst into tears. She said, I've been praying for my husband for years and years, but he'd never come to know Christ. And when he died, I gave up on God. I gave up on God because I thought God hadn't answered my prayers. But after he left you, he got hit by a transport and was killed instantly. And I thought that he was not a Christian. I want to thank you for speaking to him that day. Wow. You know what? Stories like that amaze me. You know, at times we say things like, well, we shouldn't be amazed by the things that God does. But I would say that we should never cease to be amazed by the things that God does. If I look around this congregation, I can see all sorts of people who I know God has worked in your lives in different ways. And some of you have come to know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, some recently, some not so recently. And I've seen how God has worked in different people's lives in helping them through different difficult times, through grief and sadness, and helping people get over issues and problems and difficulties. And you know what? It is amazing what God does in people's lives.